Most people think outsmarting someone means being smarter than them. It doesn't. In fact, some of the smartest people in the room are the easiest people to manipulate because intelligence is not the same thing as awareness. You can have a brilliant mind and still be controlled by your emotions. You can know exactly what you want and still reveal it too quickly. You can be extremely confident and still walk straight into someone else's trap. The person who wins isn't always the person with the best argument. It's usually the person who understands what's happening beneath the argument. What does this person actually want? What are they afraid of? What are they trying to make me feel? And most importantly, why are they behaving this way? Once you start looking at people this way, social situations begin to change. You stop reacting to people, you start observing them, and that's where real power begins. Because most people are completely predictable. They show you what they want, they show you what threatens them, they show you what makes them jealous. They show you where their ego is fragile, but because we're too busy defending ourselves, proving ourselves, or trying to be liked, we don't notice. And that is the first mistake. The first rule is simple: never let your emotions make your decisions for you. This sounds obvious, but it's one of the hardest things for people to actually do. Someone insults you, you immediately want to respond. Someone ignores you, you immediately want to know why. Someone challenges your intelligence, you feel the need to prove yourself. Someone gets promoted before you, suddenly you feel angry. Someone criticizes you, you spend the entire night thinking about it. Notice what happened. The other person didn't need to control you directly. They simply pushed an emotional button, and you did the rest. That's what makes emotional people so easy to manipulate. They can be predicted. If I know exactly what will make you angry, I know how to move you. If I know exactly what will make you insecure, I know how to destabilize you. If I know exactly what will make you desperate for approval, I know how to make you chase it. And this is why composure is such a powerful form of intelligence. When somebody provokes you, they are often hoping you'll react before you think. So don't give them that satisfaction. Pause, watch. Ask yourself, why did they say that? That question changes everything because now you're no longer inside the emotion. You're observing the situation from the outside. And sometimes you'll discover something interesting. The insult wasn't really about you. The criticism wasn't really about your weakness. The aggression wasn't really about the situation. It was about them, their insecurity, their envy, their need for control, their fear of losing status. People constantly reveal themselves through the things they attack in others. So don't just listen to what people say. Watch what triggers them. Watch what they defend. Watch what they cannot tolerate. Because those reactions often tell you more about a person than their words ever will. And this leads to the second rule: never reveal everything you know. Most people have an almost uncontrollable desire to explain themselves. They want people to understand them. They want to prove that they were right. They want to explain why they made a decision. They want to tell everyone what they're planning, and they think transparency automatically creates trust. But there's a difference between being honest and being completely exposed. When people know exactly what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you fear, and what you want, they have a map of you. And once someone has a map, they can predict your movements. Think about negotiations. If the other person knows exactly how badly you need the deal, you've already weakened your position. If they know you're desperate for the promotion, they can use that desperation. If they know you're terrified of losing the relationship, they know exactly what you're willing to tolerate. This doesn't mean you should become secretive or deceptive. It means you should develop the discipline to not explain every thought that passes through your mind. Silence is often more informative than another explanation. Let people wonder. Let them interpret. Let them reveal more than you do. There's something else that happens when you stop constantly explaining yourself. People start paying more attention to you because mystery creates curiosity, and curiosity creates attention. You don't need to announce your next move. You don't need to tell everyone what you're building. You don't need to convince people that you're capable. Do the work. Let the results speak. And if someone misunderstands you, Sometimes you don't need to correct them. That can be difficult for the ego. But your ego wants everyone to have the correct image of you. Power doesn't always require that. Sometimes it's more useful to let people underestimate you, which brings us to the third rule: never compete where your opponent is strongest. This is one of the biggest mistakes intelligent people make. Someone insults you, so you try to insult them better. Someone argues emotionally, so you try to win the argument. Someone wants to turn everything into a competition, so you accept the competition. Why? You have entered their game, and once you're playing their game, they've already gained an advantage. Imagine someone who is extremely aggressive in conversation. They interrupt, they speak loudly, they constantly challenge you. They want you to become emotional. If you become emotional too, you're fighting them on their territory. Instead, slow down, ask questions, make them explain themselves. Let them keep talking. Something interesting happens when people talk too much. They reveal themselves, they contradict themselves, they expose their assumptions, they reveal what they're afraid of, they give you information, and they often don't realize they're doing it. This is why observation is such a powerful weapon. You don't always have to attack. Sometimes you simply need to wait. People are constantly giving you information for free. A person tells you they're extremely loyal. Pay attention. A person repeatedly tells you how successful they are. Pay attention. A person constantly talks about how much they hate arrogant people. Pay attention. A person becomes uncomfortable whenever somebody else receives praise. Pay attention. Don't immediately judge them. Study the pattern, because one isolated behavior can mean almost anything. But repeated behavior starts telling a story, and this is where most people fail. They judge people based on what those people say they are. Instead, judge patterns. Someone can tell you they're kind. Watch how they treat someone who has nothing to offer them. Someone can tell you they're confident. Watch how they react when someone else receives attention. Someone can tell you they don't care about status. Watch what happens when they enter a room filled with high status people. That's where character becomes visible, not in what people claim, in what they repeatedly do. And that brings us to the fourth rule: understand what people want before you try to influence them. This is where most people completely misunderstand human behavior. They try to persuade people with logic. But human beings aren't purely logical. A person can understand your argument perfectly and still reject it. Why? Because the argument threatens something they care about. Maybe their identity, maybe their pride, maybe their status, maybe their sense of security, maybe their need to feel important. You can give someone 10 reasons why they're wrong, and they'll still defend the position, not because they haven't understood you, but because admitting you're right would force them to admit something painful about themselves. So before you try to convince someone, ask a different question. What does this person need to believe? That's much more powerful. Maybe they need to feel intelligent. Then don't humiliate them. Maybe they need to feel respected. Then don't make them feel insignificant. Maybe they need recognition. Then understand that recognition may be more important to them than money. Maybe they're afraid of losing control. Then attacking them directly will only make them more defensive. People are not moved only by what is objectively true. They're moved by what satisfies something inside them. And once you understand that, you stop trying to push people. You start understanding the emotional structure behind their decisions. This is not about controlling everyone. It's about seeing the invisible motives that most people never bother to examine. Because the person who understands motives has an enormous advantage over the person who only listens to words. Think about envy. Someone may smile when you succeed. They may congratulate you. They may tell you how happy they are for you. But watch what happens afterward. Do they suddenly become distant? Do they minimize what you accomplished? Do they begin criticizing you? Do they start competing with you? Do they become strangely interested in your failures? Envy rarely announces itself. That's why it's dangerous. People don't like admitting that they feel inferior, so they create another explanation. Hay's arrogant. She thinks she's better than everyone. They got lucky. They don't deserve it. Sometimes those explanations are true, but sometimes they're simply ways of protecting the ego. And once you understand that, you become much harder to fool, which brings us to the fifth rule. Never become completely predictable. This may be the most important rule of all, because when people know exactly how you'll respond, they don't need to understand you anymore. They can simply anticipate you. They know when you'll get angry. They know when you'll apologize. They know when you'll chase. They know when you'll give in. They know exactly how much pressure they need to apply. And once someone can predict you, they can begin controlling the interaction. Think about the person who always responds instantly. Everyone knows they'll respond instantly. The person who always forgives, everyone knows they'll forgive. The person who always says yes, everyone knows they can ask again. The person who becomes angry every time they're challenged, everyone knows exactly which button to press. Predictability creates weakness when your patterns can be exploited. But this doesn't mean becoming random. It means becoming flexible. You shouldn't react the same way to every situation. Sometimes you speak. Sometimes you stay silent. Sometimes you confront. Sometimes you walk away. Sometimes you negotiate. Sometimes you simply let time reveal the truth. The goal isn't to confuse people. The goal is to avoid being controlled by your own habits, because there is a strange paradox here. The more control you have over yourself, the less control other people have over you. If you need everyone to like you, someone can control you through rejection. If you need to always be right, someone can control you through disagreement. If you need admiration, someone can control you through criticism. If you need to win every argument, someone can control you by challenging you. If you need immediate answers, someone can control you by withholding information. Your weaknesses become handles, and people don't always need to be malicious to grab those handles. Sometimes they simply discover them. This is why self-knowledge is more important than learning 100 psychological tricks. Because if you don't understand yourself, someone else eventually will. They'll notice what makes you angry. They'll notice what makes you insecure. They'll notice what makes you desperate. They'll notice what makes you feel important. And they'll understand you before you understand yourself. So the real goal isn't to become someone who can manipulate everyone. That's actually a very low level of power. The deeper form of power is becoming difficult to manipulate. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can receive praise without becoming dependent on it. You can be rejected without desperately chasing approval. You can be challenged without immediately becoming defensive. You can meet someone impressive without feeling inferior. You can meet someone successful without becoming envious. And you can walk away from a situation without needing the last word. That's a different kind of strength, because now your behavior isn't being dictated by whatever happens around you. You're choosing your response. And that's the real difference between reaction and strategy. Most people live reactively. Someone says something, they respond. Someone ignores them, they chase. Someone succeeds, they become jealous. Someone criticizes them, they defend themselves. Someone threatens their status, they attack. Their environment controls their emotional state. But the person who can step back and observe has an advantage. They create space between what happens and what they do next. And inside that space is freedom. So if you remember only 5 things, remember these. Control your emotions before someone else learns how to control them. Reveal less than you know. Never fight on someone else's strongest ground. Understand what people want beneath what they say. And never become so predictable that someone can control you simply by pushing the right button. But there's one final lesson underneath all 5. The smartest person in the room isn't necessarily the person who talks the most. It's often the person who notices the most. They notice the hesitation. They notice the change in tone. They notice who becomes uncomfortable when someone else succeeds. They notice who needs attention. They notice who suddenly becomes friendly when they need something. They notice who changes personality depending on who enters the room. And they don't rush to judgment, they observe. Because people are complicated, you will never completely understand another person. And you probably don't completely understand yourself. Your emotions can deceive you. Your ego can deceive you. Your desire for approval can deceive you. That's why the first step toward outsmarting other people is learning not to be fooled by yourself. Once you understand your own weaknesses, They become much harder for someone else to exploit. And when you stop needing to prove yourself, impress everyone, win every argument, or control every situation, something changes. You become calmer, you become harder to provoke, you become harder to predict. And eventually, you realize something most people never do. You don't need to dominate every person around you. You simply need to remain in control of yourself, because the person who controls himself is much harder for anyone else to control. There is another level of outsmarting people that most people never learn. It's not about being clever. It's not about having the perfect comeback. And it's certainly not about manipulating everyone around you. It's about understanding the hidden game people are playing while everyone else is focused on the surface. Because every interaction has two conversations happening at the same time. There's the conversation you can hear, and then there's the conversation happening underneath it. Someone says, I'm just trying to help you. But what do they actually want? Someone says, I don't care. But why did they feel the need to tell you they don't care? Someone says, I'm happy for you. But what happens to their behavior after you succeed? Words are often the easiest part of a person to control. Behavior is much harder to hide, and if you want to become difficult to fool, you have to start watching behavior, not promises, not explanations, patterns. Because a person can control one moment, they have a much harder time controlling a pattern that repeats over months or years. And that's where the deeper rules begin. The first deeper rule is this: watch what changes when the situation changes. People reveal themselves when their position changes. Watch how someone treats a waiter when they're sitting in a restaurant. Watch how they speak to someone who has less status. Watch how they behave when they suddenly become successful. Watch how they react when someone else gets what they wanted. Watch what happens when they lose. These moments are valuable because social masks become harder to maintain. A person can prepare what they're going to say. They can prepare how they're going to look, but unexpected circumstances create reactions, and reactions reveal structure. You might meet someone who seems incredibly confident. They're charismatic, they're funny, they're successful. Everyone seems to admire them. But then someone criticizes them. Suddenly, their entire personality changes. They become defensive, they become aggressive. They start attacking the person who criticized them. Now you have learned something. Their confidence may have been real, but it may also have been fragile, because genuine confidence doesn't require constant protection. This is why you should never judge someone only by how they behave when everything is going their way. Anybody can be pleasant when they're winning. The more interesting question is, who are they when they lose? Who are they when nobody is watching? Who are they when they don't get what they want? That's where you begin to see the person underneath the performance. And there's another important principle here. Don't mistake confidence for power. A loud person isn't necessarily powerful. A person who constantly announces their strength may actually be trying to convince themselves. Real power is often quieter. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to threaten everyone. It doesn't need to prove superiority. Think about the people you respect the most. Often they're not the people desperately trying to dominate every conversation. They're comfortable enough to listen. They're comfortable enough to say, I don't know. They're comfortable enough to let someone else have attention. They're not constantly fighting for position. That's a very different psychological state, and it brings us to another rule. Never give someone emotional access to you for free. People often think privacy means hiding information. It doesn't. Your emotional reactions are information too. If someone learns that a certain subject makes you insecure, they've learned something about you. If they learn that rejection terrifies you, they've learned something. If they learn that you desperately need approval, they've learned something. If they learn that you cannot tolerate being ignored, they've learned something. And once someone understands your emotional triggers, they don't need to know your secrets. They already know how to move you. That's why emotional discipline matters so much. Not because emotions are bad. Emotions are valuable information, but they shouldn't automatically become commands. You can feel anger without acting angry. You can feel jealousy without becoming destructive. You can feel insecurity without trying to prove yourself. You can feel attraction without becoming desperate. You can feel fear without allowing fear to make every decision. There's a difference between experiencing an emotion and obeying it. That difference is where self control begins. And there's something fascinating about people who have mastered this. They don't necessarily appear intimidating, they often appear calm, but people instinctively sense that they cannot easily push them around. Why? Because there are fewer buttons to press. And that's one of the most powerful things you can develop. Become someone with fewer buttons. Not because you become emotionless, but because you understand yourself well enough other people cannot easily hijack your emotional state. Now, here's where people make another mistake. They think being difficult to manipulate means distrusting everyone. That's not power. That's not power. That's paranoia. If you assume everyone is secretly trying to hurt you, you're still being controlled by other people. You're just being controlled by fear instead of trust. The goal is not suspicion. The goal is awareness. You can trust people while still observing them. You can love someone while still recognizing their patterns. You can respect someone while understanding their weaknesses. And you can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to you. That's maturity. Because people aren't purely good or purely bad, they're complicated. Someone can love you and still be selfish. Someone can care about you and still envy you. Someone can be generous and still want recognition. Someone can be loyal and still betray you under enough pressure. Human beings contain contradictions. If you expect people to fit neatly into categories, you'll constantly be surprised. And that brings us to another rule: never become emotionally dependent on one person's opinion of you. This is one of the easiest ways to lose psychological freedom. The moment your self-worth depends on someone's approval, they gain influence over you. If they praise you, you feel powerful. If they criticize you, you collapse. If they respond quickly, you're happy. If they become distant, you become anxious. If they choose you, you feel valuable. If they reject you, you question yourself. Look at what happened. They didn't have to threaten you. They didn't have to manipulate you. Your dependence did the work for them. That's why you need a source of identity that doesn't come entirely from other people. Your work, your values, your goals, your discipline, your ability to stand alone. Because the more internally stable you are, the less desperate you become for external validation. And desperation is one of the easiest things for people to sense. You can hide words, you can hide intentions. It's much harder to hide desperation. People feel it. They feel it when you're trying too hard to impress them. They feel it when you're afraid they'll leave. They feel it when you're desperate for a promotion. They feel it when you're trying to prove you're important. And paradoxically, the harder you try to prove your value, the less powerful you often appear, because people are asking themselves, why does this person need me to believe this so badly? That's why one of the most powerful psychological shifts you can make is to stop trying to convince everyone. You don't have to convince someone that you're intelligent. You don't have to convince someone that you're successful. You don't have to convince someone that you're attractive. You don't have to convince someone that you're important. If it is real, it will eventually become visible. And if someone refuses to see it, that's their problem. There's freedom in that. Now let's go even deeper. One of the easiest ways to understand a person is to study what they repeatedly complain about, because complaints often reveal hidden desires. Someone constantly complains that nobody respects them. Maybe respect is extremely important to them. Someone constantly complains about rich people. Maybe status and money occupy more of their mind than they admit. Someone constantly complains that everyone is fake. Maybe they've experienced betrayal, or maybe they're projecting their own behavior. Someone constantly talks about how nobody appreciates them. Maybe recognition is one of their strongest needs. Listen carefully to complaints. They're often disguised confessions, and this is especially important when dealing with difficult people. Instead of asking, why are they acting like this? Ask, what need are they trying to satisfy? Maybe they want control. Maybe they want attention. Maybe they want recognition. Maybe they want revenge. Maybe they want to feel superior. Maybe they want security. Once you understand the need, their behavior becomes much easier to predict And prediction is one of the foundations of strategic thinking. If you know what someone wants, you can often anticipate what they'll do next. But there's an even deeper level. Sometimes people don't actually know what they want. They only know what emotion they're trying to escape. Someone constantly chases money because they are terrified of being insignificant. Someone constantly seeks relationships because they're terrified of being alone. Someone constantly seeks admiration because they're terrified they're not enough. Someone constantly seeks control because uncertainty makes them feel weak. So don't only look at what people pursue, look at what they're running from. That question can reveal an enormous amount. It can reveal something about you too. Because you may discover that some of your goals aren't really goals, they're emotional defenses. You're not trying to become successful. You're trying to prove something. You're not trying to become wealthy. You're trying to escape the feeling of being inferior. You're not trying to become attractive. You're trying to make rejection impossible. You're not trying to become powerful. You're trying to make yourself feel safe. Those are very different motivations. And if you don't understand the difference, you can spend years chasing something that never satisfies you. This is why self awareness is ultimately more powerful than social strategy. Because the person who understands everyone except himself is still vulnerable. He can read other people, but he cannot read his own motives. And his own motives will eventually sabotage him. Now consider another situation. Someone tries to make you jealous. They casually mention another person's success. They talk about how many people want them. They tell you about an opportunity you missed. They show you something they know you want, and you react. That's exactly what they were looking for. Jealousy is one of the easiest emotional levers because it creates urgency. Suddenly, you don't want something because it matters to you. You want it because someone else has it. That's dangerous because now somebody else's life is determining your desires. This is why you should become suspicious of sudden emotional urgency. When you suddenly feel, I need this, I need to prove myself, I can't let them win, I have to show them, pause. Ask yourself, would I still want this if nobody else knew about it? That's a powerful question because sometimes the desire disappears immediately and you realize you weren't pursuing the thing, you were pursuing status. You were trying to repair your ego. And once you see that, you regain control. There's another psychological trap people fall into. They become obsessed with winning against people they don't even respect. Think about how irrational that is. You spend hours thinking about someone you don't even admire. You change your plans because of someone you don't even want to become. You let someone you dislike occupy your mind. That's not dominance, that's dependence. The strongest response to certain people is not revenge, it's irrelevance. You don't need to destroy everyone who disrespects you. You don't need to respond to every insult. You don't need to prove every person wrong. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply to continue building your life because attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Where your attention goes, your life follows, so be careful who gets access to it. And here's the final lesson. The ultimate form of psychological dominance isn't making other people obey you. It's becoming so internally grounded that you don't need them to. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You don't need everyone to admire you. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need everyone to like you. You don't even need to win every interaction. And once you stop needing those things, people lose many of the ways they can control you. They can't control you through praise. They can't control you through rejection. They can't control you through envy. They can't control you through intimidation. They can't control you through uncertainty because your center isn't outside of you anymore. It's inside. And that's the part most people misunderstand about power. Power isn't simply the ability to control other people. It's the ability to remain yourself while other people are trying to influence you. You can listen without obeying. You can love without becoming dependent. You can compete without becoming obsessed. You can lose without becoming destroyed. You can win without becoming arrogant. And you can walk away without needing revenge. That is a much higher form of strength because anyone can become aggressive. Anyone can become manipulative. Anyone can learn a few psychological tricks. but very few people can remain calm when their ego is attacked. Very few people can admit when they're wrong. Very few people can watch someone else succeed without feeling threatened. Very few people can remain silent when they desperately want to prove themselves. And very few people can understand another person's weakness without immediately trying to exploit it. That is the real test. Because once you understand human nature, you have a choice. You can use that knowledge to manipulate everyone around you, or you can use it to become harder to manipulate yourself. The second path is far more powerful. So observe people, study patterns, listen carefully, control your reactions, protect your attention, understand what people want, and above all, know yourself. Because if you don't understand your own weaknesses, someone else eventually will. And when that happens, they won't need to outsmart you. You'll do it for them.